Hello, my name is Peter Parfitt and welcome to the New Brick Workshop. Well, this is a second video in my little mini-series about making trays, but trays on a production line so you can make lots of little presents for various people. And we're at the stage now where we're going to do the router work. And for that we need obviously a router and we've got our template and we just need guide bushes. Now, after making the previous video, I was talking to a chap at Axminster Tools and said, oh yes, I'm just about to do the template work and I'm going to use your guide bushes. He said, would you like to try our brand new guide bushes? And so they've sent me a set for evaluation. And here it is. And the great thing about this set, which actually I had commented on before, I think in either previous videos of mine or I've certainly mentioned it to Axminster, that these things are no good unless you have a mandrel. So what they've done now is they've included a mandrel. The mandrel is capable of working with any size router collet, basically 1/4 inch, 8mm, 12 a big half inch, 12mm big half inch. So there's the new set. But the bits are made from stainless steel, which I far prefer. And the other advantage is that the actual collar depth now has gone down to 6.5mm. And that's important because if you're making a template, often you don't need to make the template out of very thick material. It's often better to make it out of thinner material. So with this, I can make a template with 8mm or 7mm ply. And so that's a great advantage. Anyway, I'm going to use these and we'll see how they go. Now, in order to fit a guide bush onto your router base, you will need a guide bush adapter. Now, I've got the Festool OF1010 router, and by far the best adapter I've found is the Lee 704R. Now, you can look up on the Lee website or on the Axminster website to find out which of the guide bush adapters will suit your router. So once you've got your guide bush adapter, you need to attach it to your router, but only loosely at this stage. Now you may notice that I've got two different screws here. The reason for that is one of my threads stripped, but I found that by placing a longer screw in, I was able to find a bit of virgin thread, and so that works fine. So that guide bush adapter can move around, so I've not tightened it all the way. Next thing to do is get your mandrel. Now, first of all, I will be using a 10mm guide bush, and I could have fitted this at this stage, and the mandrel would have operated on it because it's got this smaller section here. But for extra accuracy, you're better off using the larger section up here, and I'm going to move that down, and I'm going to tighten this up. There's a little grub screw in there. So that's firmly in place. Having done that, I'm now going to insert this in the router. Now, the reason we moved the base down in this case, as you look at it, is because we want it to be sprung back, and so the base is firmly in contact with the mandrel. But first of all, I've got to tighten up the collet, which only takes a second or two, so that a mandrel is now held really securely. And now I'm going to release, and now you can see that the base now is coming into firm contact with the mandrel, and it's forcing the guide bush adapter to be in the center. Once it's there, I like to now add a bit of extra force, thumb on there, fingers underneath the base of the router, so I'm now adding not just the spring but a bit of extra force as I tighten up. And I'm going to go almost all the way there, almost all the way with that one, and then a final nip with that one, and a final nip with this one. So that's it. That guide bush adapter is now centered, and we can now take away the mandrel and fit the first guide bush. And once you've done this the first time, you don't need to do it again unless you have a reason to remove that guide bush adapter. So that's good for the rest of this project. And I'm going to fit a 10mm guide bush. Goes into the guide bush adapter there, and then there is a securing screw ring which goes in the back. On the OF1010 router, I've removed the little plastic dust shroud which fits inside here to make it easier. That's nice and tight, and I can now fit my cutter, and this is a 4mm cutter. Now, when you're doing any guide bush work, it's important to understand router template offsets, and I've produced a table, and this table is free to anyone who requests it. All I need is your email address, and this table shows cutter sizes, and it's all metric: 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 10 and 12mm cutter sizes, and guide bush diameters 10 up to 30, and that range of guide bushes matches those available in the set. And in order to understand the offset business, let's look at this profile here. I used an 18mm guide bush and a 4mm cutter, and that produced that profile. For the piece of thin wood that's going on top, I need to use a different combination, and I've chosen to use a combination which retains the same cutter size, 4mm, but in order to produce a fit between the piece of oak or whatever it is that's going on top of here, you need to use a 10mm guide bush, because one is considered to be a hole and the other is considered to be a plug. And in this particular case, the plug, the thing that goes in the hole, is this bit, and the hole is what will be the bottom of the piece of oak. Don't worry, it will all become clearer as we go along. Now, originally I was going to be operating just here, but actually I would rather be closer to the extractor, and so I'm going to move into this position just here, which makes it a little bit easier. Now, let me just show you what I've got here. I've got my piece of wood. This is my piece of maple, and I've joined this piece onto it to allow me to keep moving the maple forward, but to have the opportunity to clamp it at this rear end here. So I'll push this back in place there, and I'm just going to clamp this now. I've got a pair of clamps here, and then we can do the first bit of cutting. We've got that set up, that's held firmly, that's in place. I can now do my first cut using the 10mm guide bush and the 4mm cutter, and that's going to be along that profile, and that will fit perfectly on top of the mahogany. Right, so I've just done the first cut, which takes away the odd-shaped piece that would have been up here, and I can now start doing the first of the proper cuts for this piece of wood. Now, I've got to do it fairly carefully because this is maple and it's a fairly small cutter. Now, if I just take this out, so here's the line that I've just cut. And the important part for this one is the underneath of this section here, because that profile there will fit exactly on top of the curve of the mahogany piece, which we'll be doing later. So I'm going to produce a series of these from this piece of wood, then I'll cut through there, and I've got then lots of little pieces to stick on to the mahogany. Once this piece is joined onto its piece of mahogany, it goes back in to the jig, and we then finish off that bit of the profile, and it's then absolutely parallel. Now, I've just finished these now, and you can see I've got 1, 2, 3, 4, 5 there, and there would have been a 6th one on this piece, but I had a little whoopsie because I allowed the guide bush to slip away from the template just a tiny bit, and so it made a little bit of a bishop. So I would have got one more. You do need to make sure that your guide bush stays in absolute contact with the template all the way through the process. Well, it's now time to cut the hole which goes in dead centre of these, and I've made a jig and I've put a piece of wood in here already. And you can see there's a stop here, and the two left and right stops are there as well. And I have to make sure that I have my face edge up against the bottom stop each time, because the hole is slightly offset. And I'm going to drill through here with a 5.5mm bit. Now, please ignore what I've made this from. It's an old template. The template was adequate, but not as good as the current template. And so I'm making best use of one of my previous bishops. And that's all of those done. Now, although it took me probably about 10 minutes to make this jig, it saved me a lot of time in marking out and estimating where those holes should go. So that's a good idea, make a jig. Now, for that previous operation, we were using a 10mm guide bush. And now for all of the work on the mahogany parts of the ends, we're going to use an 18mm guide bush. So I'm going to just take the power cord off here, and I'm going to put my fingers in and undo the screw at the back. Take off the 10mm guide bush, put it back in its place, and take the 18mm guide bush and slot it in. Now, it's slightly fiddly doing it like this with this adapter plate in place, but it does mean I don't have to reuse the centering mandrel. So I've put the new guide bush in the router, so it's the 18mm guide bush now. I've put my first piece of wood in here. I've just modified my 4mm pins so that they're easier to control, and because they only ever need to be accessed from the top. So those are in place now. I'll just make sure that's tight. It is. So I remove my pins, and so that piece of wood is held in place. Means now I can do, first of all, the big curve at the top, then I'm going to rotate the template, and I'll then do the circular curve here. So that's that first cut. I'm now going to carefully lift this, rotate it, place it back down, and remember this centerpiece which is going to come out is held in by that screw. I'll take away my waste piece, and there we have that profile. I'm very pleased with that. I think that's quite a nice handle. Well, that's it, one down, 9 more to go. That's all the routering done to do the shaping of those end pieces, and really it wasn't a great challenge at all. Next stage now is to glue on some of these top pieces onto those, and then we're going to then just redo that top curve there. So there I have 5 of them. Obviously I've got more to create. Next job is to glue these onto those other pieces. Now I've been asked many times why one needs to use a different guide bush and sometimes also a different cutter in order to produce one shape that fits into another. And it's very simple. And I can illustrate that with something that's going to fit in here. Now when we cut this hole, we used an 18mm guide bush and a 4mm cutter. And this was the piece that came out of the hole. So I couldn't use the same guide bush and the same cutter to produce something that would fit neatly in there. And this is why we then change, in this case, to a 10mm guide bush, but we still got the same cutter. And that's using the same template, my black template which you've seen before, and now that fits in there just about perfectly. So in order to get, let's take that out, it's quite tight. So in order to get a perfect match between these two pieces, one needs to have one guide bush and the other one needs to have the other. And here's one I did earlier, and I've mounted on here. And the whole idea of this is that I'm now able to do mitre cuts on the two ends here by using this outer piece of wood as the frame, if you like, as the reference edge. Now I think most of you know me quite well, or certainly well enough to know that I always admit to my mistakes. I point them out because you don't learn unless you make mistakes. You always learn from your mistakes. Right. Now, the first lesson I've learned is that when I came to cut these pieces out, and in this case, it's the underside of that cut there that's important. And I was doing it with the router going along like this. And it was very difficult to ensure that the guide bush didn't wander away from this template edge, which would mean that the cut would go into the part which is going to show. Let me show you. So as the router cutter is cutting this piece, it's the underside we're cutting. And if you have a little whoopsie and it moves away from the template, then it's going to make a whoopsie that shows because you won't have that perfect fit. So the first lesson I've learnt is that my guide should have the same shape there but reproduced here. So if our template now goes up like that, and the piece that we want is then above, it's protected by the actual template. So you can't go beyond into the area that we want to preserve. Now, the other mistake I made, in my enthusiasm, I must say, to get going, was that these pieces originally had little bits that went left and right. And those gave me the registration left and right in the template. And in my excitement, having done all these, I thought, well, I'll cut those off closer to size. But then I've got to stick these pieces on. And then when those are stuck on, I've got to put it back in the template again to finish this top edge. And of course, now I've lost my registration here. And the way I'm overcoming it is that I'm going to have a piece like this screwed on to the underside of the template, which will allow me to re-register this in exactly the right place. So that's a bit of a workaround. And really, it was unnecessary. It's only because I made that little bishop by cutting those pieces off the ends here. Never mind. Well, it's time to do the gluing now, and I've just started on this piece. And now we've got to find a method of clamping those two pieces together. So I'm going to use masking tape, a piece in the middle, and only 5,000 more to go. And again, try and do all these processes all at the same time, because you'll then get even better and quicker at doing them. Now I've just sanded all of these, so now that maple is flush with the mahogany, and it's now time to do the final trim of this top edge. Now you will recall that I said I had made the mistake of cutting these off too early, so it's made it difficult for me to get registration. So what I've done is I've cut this piece out, which fits exactly inside that cutout. So with that registered like so, I can now put this in place using the dogs. I've got my 4mm cutter in the router still, and I've now put the 18mm guide bush back in, because that will give a parallel cut along that top, parallel to the edge of the mahogany. Now, as there's less underneath the template now, I've got these two rejects that I created, which are going to go underneath here and here, and that will stop that template from rocking at all as I do the cut. And I'm going to go down just a little bit at a time, about 4mm each go. So there's that piece. That's now smooth on top. It will get a sand in the final assembly stage. All I've got to do now is to cut a channel for the base. I've got to also round over these edges and then cut the mitres at each end. Now, it's really important to do things in the correct order. I've unfortunately made a couple of little bishops on that front, but let me just take you through it. Obviously, the first thing to do is to cut your wasteboard and then your template. And remember, you may, with this template, have to ask a friend with a CNC to produce it if you're unable to do that oval shape, which is quite tricky. Then after that, you need to cut your stock to size. These are the bits for the long sides, and these are the bits that go over them. Obviously, these started off as rectangular blanks as well. And once you've done that, you can go about shaping the ends, and that's the top edge followed by that. But don't make the mistake that I made by trimming these off. You want to leave them with the little bit sticking on each side and leave them to the very end, even after you've stuck that bit of maple detail on the top, because that will mean you've got something to push up against the back fence of your capex or whatever saw you're going to use for doing the mitres at each end. And that will make life easier. But anyway, I made that whoopsie. And then you should produce all of the, in my case, maple curved pieces, and then you can stick those on. You can then, as you might see in the background, stick the pieces of maple detail onto the long sides. Then when you've done those processes, you need to sand everything off so that the maple and the mahogany are all nice and smooth in the same plane, because the following step is really, really important. We're then going to put round over detail on the various bits and pieces, and that will be on these edges, so in the handhole both sides, and on the top detail both sides, and on the bottom. And that means that when the tray is assembled, there will be no sort of awkward little rough bits. And that rounding over detail is really important. And once you've done that to all of the stock, including the long sides, you then need to apply a very thin first coat of Osmo. And the reason for that is that when that's on, before the mitres are done, before the channel is done, for the baseboard, it means that the surface is then protected from the glue which will be applied in the following stage. So you've got that thin layer of Osmo on, it's dried, and you can then cut the channel in all the pieces, that's in the sides and the ends, and you can also then cut the mitres. And then once that's done, you can cut the bases to size and glue it up. and then do the finish work. And maybe one step is go and buy yourself a set of the guide bushes, because they're really important. These are really super, as I've said before, because they've got the shallower piece here, so you can use a thinner template, and they've also got the mandrel, which is absolutely vital if you're going to do accurate work like this. Many thanks for watching. Take care. Bye-bye.